How's it going, everyone? Today we are talking about the results of the Ontario provincial elections, where the Conservatives won 80 seats out of 124, giving them a large majority of Parliament. 80 out of 124 is about 65% of the seats. And the question that we're going to be asking is, did the two left-wing parties, the Liberals and the NDP, did they split the vote? In other words, if the Liberals and the NDP had run as a single party, would they have actually gotten more seats than the Conservatives? Now, because it is a first past the post system, the question is not as simple as adding the number of seats that the Liberals and NDP won, or by adding the percent of the popular vote that they won. How it works is, for every single electoral district, right, and Ontario has 124 of them, the political party that wins more votes than anyone else in that district wins the seat that represents that district. Okay, so for example, if we look at Oxford here, right, Conservatives won 55.3% of the votes. That's more than anyone else, right? So like if you take Liberal and NDP percent of the votes, add them up, you're not going to get more than 55.3. So Conservatives won this seat and would have won it even if Liberals and NDP were united. Now, if on the other hand you take, say, Hamilton Mountain, well, here the Conservatives also won, right? They won 36.2% of the vote only, which is not most of the votes, but they won more than anybody else, so they win that seat as well. Now, if Liberals and NDP ran as one party and all these Liberal and NDP votes went towards one party, well, that would actually be more than 56% of the votes, and then the Liberal NDP United Party would have actually won this seat instead. Okay, so the number of seats and the percent of the popular vote isn't the same thing. Okay, that's why, for example, Conservatives won 65% of the seats, but if you look at popular vote, they won about 43% of the popular vote. Now, that's still a huge victory because you've got a situation with four different parties plus independents, at least one independent that won a seat. So in that kind of situation, winning 43% of the vote is actually huge, right? But 43% of the vote is not equal to 65-ish percent of the seats, okay? So you can't just add the popular vote and say like, oh, you know, adding the popular vote of the NDP and the Liberals gives us more than the 43% that the Conservatives won, so therefore this alliance of Liberals and NDP would have won. No, not so fast. It's not based on popular vote. It's based on first past the post. At the same time, you can't just add the seats of the Liberals and NDP and say, oh, that's going to be 41 seats, which is only about half of how much the Conservatives won. So no, an NDP Liberal alliance would not have won in the election. You can't do that either because of situations like what we just saw, right? There's seats that the Conservatives won, right, that the Liberal NDP alliance would have won had they run as one party, right? Like in Hamilton Mountain here, right? 31% voted for Liberals, 26% voted for NDP. That's 57% together, which would have actually been higher than the 36.2% that voted for Conservatives. So to really find out whether the Liberals and the NDP split the vote, you got to look at every single electoral district. What percent voted for Liberals, what percent voted for NDP, add it up, and then ask, is that number more than how much voted for any other party? Well, lucky for you, I already did that for you, and we can look at that right now. So let's do that. Here you've got an Excel spreadsheet. You've got every single electoral district right here. And for every one of those districts, we have what percent voted for Conservatives, what percent voted for Liberals, what percent voted for NDP, and the sum of how much voted for Liberals plus how much voted for NDP. Now, there are two more parties, you could say, that also won seats. You've got the Greens, who won 2 seats, okay, one in Guelph and one in Kitchener Centre, and you also have an independent candidate who won 1 seat. Now, for all 3 of those electoral districts, the Greens and the independent, they won more than 50% of the seats, right? So even if you were to add Liberal and NDP votes there, you would not get more than 50%, all right? And those districts are right here, okay? Here you've got Kitchener Centre, where the Greens won. Here you've got not too far away Guelph, which is also where the Greens won. And south of that, you've got an independent victory right here with 63.7% of the vote. Okay, now just in Guelph, that was, just to for completion, I'll mention it, 56.9% of the vote went to the Greens. And in Kitchener Centre, 51.4% went to the Greens. So those 3 electoral districts would not have flipped if NDP and Liberals ran as a single party. So let's look at the other ones. All right. So here's our NDP plus Liberal percent of the vote. Okay. And we compare that to the Conservative percent of the vote, and we see, well, if Liberals plus NDP is bigger, then they would have won that seat, right? So here, highlighted in kind of like a orangish, pinkish, reddish color, right? We have the electoral districts that the Liberal plus NDP Union party would have won, okay? And when we add that all up, right, we get 61 seats. All right. So if Liberals and NDP ran as one party and everyone who voted for Liberals or NDP had voted for that party, that's a big assumption we'll talk about later, then that party would have won 61 seats. Now, those 61 seats include the 14 and 27 that the Liberals and NDP already won as separate parties. Okay. And if we do 61 minus 14 minus 27, we get, drumroll, 20, okay? Which means that is 20 seats that this hypothetical united left-wing party would have taken from the Conservatives, all right? So if the election went that way, right, you would have this Liberal NDP Union party with 61 seats. You would have the Conservatives not with 80, but with 80 minus 20. Conservatives with 60 seats. So Liberals plus NDP win, right, by 1 seat. Now the problem is, with that conclusion, is that you need 63 seats to control majority of the parliament. And this independent candidate, they actually align more so with Conservatives. So you have 61 Conservative seats, effectively, and 61 Liberal / NDP seats, and that's a tie. Now you could say, well, the Greens actually usually align more so with the left wing. So if the Greens form an alliance with this Liberal NDP party, then you have 63 seats versus 61, which gives this Liberal NDP minority government through alliance with the Greens gives them control of Parliament. But this is very, very weak control, right? You got 63 seats versus 61. Someone doesn't show up to vote someday, or someone doesn't agree with the rest of their party on some motion, and then they don't have control of the Parliament anymore, all right? So you could say, oh, yeah, they split the vote, right? They split the vote to gain a minority government, right? To barely win, but they did split the vote that way. But remember that big assumption we were talking about. All this math is assuming that everybody who voted for NDP and everybody who voted for Liberal would have still voted for this united Liberal NDP party, okay? And that assumption is a very bold one. There's one big indicator that would actually not be the case. And that indicator is what happened with the NDP. The NDP, now this page here, this is from the Toronto Star, by the way, the NDP lost a lot in this election. Yes, they have second place in terms of number of seats, but they actually lost seats compared to the previous election, right? They lost 4 seats, to be specific, and they lost a substantial amount of the popular vote, all right? So in terms of popular vote, they went from 23.7%, pretty much tied with Liberals at 23.9%. That's from the previous election. This election, they went from 23.7 all the way down to 18.6. Okay. Meanwhile, Liberals went up by roughly the same amount, from 23.9 to 30. So a lot less people voted for NDP. You know, whatever happened since the previous election in 2022, a lot of people decided to bail on the NDP since then. Okay. Liberals went up by a lot in popular vote. Conservatives went up by 2 and a bit percent, right? NDP lost a lot of support, right? If we look at these maps here, which looks at different regions of the province, and for each party, did they gain or lose support in the region? Okay, the upward arrows means they gained support in the region or in the electoral district. Liberals gained support pretty much everywhere. Conservatives gained support all over the place, okay, pretty much everywhere. NDP lost support almost everywhere, okay? So if we then look at this chart here, we can sort of see where some of that support likely went. Okay, this is about the seat change, right? So NDP, they lost 4 seats. 2 of them went to the Conservatives. 1 went to Greens, 1 went to Liberals. Okay, so they lost some seats to everybody else. Okay, Conservatives, well, they gained some seats from the NDP, and they lost 5 seats to the Liberals. Greens gained from the NDP. Liberals gained from Conservatives and NDP. Okay, so something is pushing people away from the NDP, right? And if the NDP and the Liberals united, now meanwhile, Liberals actually did much better than the previous election, right? Their seats went from 8 to 14, right? Their popular vote, we talked about, went up from 24 to 30. Okay, so Liberals actually gained a lot. NDP lost a lot. Okay, so with whatever it is pushing people away from the NDP going on, if the NDP would have joined with the Liberals, would that have pushed some people away from this joint NDP Liberal Union? Probably. Okay. So some of those people who voted for Liberals, some of those seats that went from Conservatives to Liberals, which is 5 seats, right? Some of those seats, some of those people maybe would not have went to the Liberals. If even 1 seat, if that cost this joint NDP Liberal Union, if it cost them even 1 seat, then what does that do to our numbers? If that 1 seat goes to the Conservatives, that's 61 for Conservatives, 60 for Liberals, or Liberal/NDP combined, and now they're both at 62, right? Well, if you can compare Conservatives to Liberal/NDP, well, Conservatives win the election, done, right? And then when you actually look at control of Parliament, that's 62 for the right wing and 62 for the left wing. It's a tie. And that's if just 1 of those seats is lost as a result of people not wanting to support the Liberals if the Liberals were to join into one party with the NDP. Okay. And that's just 1 seat, right? Change it to 2 seats and it's over, right? Now you've got 62 seats for the Conservatives versus 59 for Liberal/NDP. And you look at control of Parliament, that's 63% with the 1 independent vote, gives the right wing control of Parliament. Okay, and when you look at the fact that 5 seats went from Conservatives to Liberals, okay, these are former Conservative voters, right? Center-right voters feeling, okay, maybe Liberals they're comfortable with the Liberals this time around, right? These are centrist voters. Would they be less likely to vote for a not as center left but more farther left wing party if Liberals and NDP joined together? Yeah, probably, right? So there we have it. Did Liberals and NDP split the vote? Well, as interesting as it is, the answer is not obvious, because if you purely look at the numbers, it looks like, yeah, they split the vote to barely win a minority government. But when you take more detail into the situation and consider the fact that joining with the NDP could actually cost the Liberals votes and cost the Liberals seats, that there's a pretty high likelihood of that, then you realize that, you know what, maybe this split the vote thing isn't actually really what happened, right? And hey, that's a pretty interesting conclusion when the conclusion is not clear, right? When the answer is not clear whether they split the vote or not. So thought that'd be interesting to share. I hope you enjoyed that, and until next time.